I'm the Digital Image Program Coordinator there and have been for about the last 2 years. I'd like to welcome you this morning. I'd like to introduce our presenters to you before they begin. Our 2 sessions are on Manage and Provide. The Manage portion will be done by Kate Flynn and Julie Lizicki. Kate is the portal manager for the Chicago Collections Consortium. She previously was a resident librarian at the University of Illinois at Chicago for digital programs and services. She earned an MSI from the University of Michigan School of Information in 2011, specializing in preservation of information and archives and record management. She is most interested in issues around digital preservation and user experience. Our other presenter on Manage will be Julia Lizicki. She's currently the Library Acquisitions Coordinator at Lewis University. Previously worked in the Howard and Louise Alderman Regional History Collection at Lewis University, in which the main focus was assisting with digital collections. Our second part of the program will be on Provide. That will be done by David Levinson. He is a systems librarian and academic technologist, dividing his time between library and information technology. He's been at Lake Forest College since 1992. David has participated in 2 library system migrations in Carly. He has served on the Digital Collections User Group, renamed the Created Content Committee, and was a member of the DCUG/Preservation Working Group Joint Subcommittee that created Carly's Digital Preservation Trainers Program. Our final presenter on Provide will be Patrice Prudhomme, Head of Digital Collections at Milner Library, Illinois State University. He is responsible for several of the project management processes in the Digital Collections Department, including copyrights, metadata, and documentation, design, and supervision of the Digital Center. He is a project lead in the Digital Power Grant project funded by the IMLS with 4 other academic institutions in the state of Illinois, which objective is to investigate and recommend scalable, sustainable digital preservation solutions for small and medium-sized libraries with restricted resources. We'd like to welcome you to our presentation, and I'll turn it over to Kate and Julia. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. This is Julia, and I'm going to be starting you off with the Manage portion. First, I don't know how many of you have attended our webinars before, but I wanted to start off with our mission. And the mission of the Digital Preservation Outreach and Education Program of the Library of Congress is to foster national outreach and education to encourage individuals and organizations to actively preserve their digital content, building on a collaborative network of instructors, contributors, and institutional partners. So if you've attended one of our webinars before, this may look familiar to you. These are the 6 modules of the Digital Preservation Outreach and Education Program. The first portion of this webinar will address the Manage module, which addresses what provisions are needed for long-term management. So here's an overview of what we're going to be addressing today. We are going to address in the Manage module the organizational requirements and objectives, technology, designated resources, and standards and best practices. The core of good management is balance. This graphic comes out of the work at Cornell University around 2003. They developed and included in their digital project management workshops a model called the 3-legged stool for digital preservation. Looking at this model can help you visualize and develop a well-formed and sustainable digital preservation program. It's very easy just to focus on the technology piece of digital preservation, but if you want a sustainable program, you need to look at all other legs of the stool. Without all 3 legs, the stool falls over. An effective management approach will address organizational requirements and objectives, technological opportunities and change, resources such as funding, staff, and equipment. We will be referring back to this model throughout this management module. So first off, the organizational leg determines the mandate, the scope, the objectives, and the staffing of an organization. First, you want to build your team. There are different kinds of skills that contribute to digital preservation, and you might want to have the following staff involved along with the skill set. So first off, you're going to want to have somebody with administration skills, technical services, systems or IT, law, and outreach. Some skills are needed all of the time, such as project management or metadata management, and some are only needed periodically, such as legal and marketing expertise. Even though some of these skills are only used periodically, you still want to include them in your initial team. You may want to add team members as you work through digital preservation projects, but it would be easier and more time effective to have as many team members as possible in place at the start. Once you have your team in place, you can start focusing on creating a digital preservation policy. Here are a few reasons why a digital preservation policy is important. It demonstrates institutional commitment. It meets professional best practices and standards, which will be addressed later, manages expectations, identifies issues and challenges that you may have, raises awareness, and it defines the roles and responsibilities for your team and for your institution. Here are a few basic suggestions for what should be included in your policy. A purpose statement. Why are you writing the preservation policy? Why is digital preservation important to your institution? Relation statement. How does the document relate to others across the whole institution? Does it complement current records management policies that are already in place? An objective statement. What are the goals of digital preservation? Are the goals based on a specific project, or do they reach the institution level? What are the overarching goals of your preservation program? You might want to include both long-term and short-term goals in this portion of your policy. You are going to want to have a periodic review statement. How often will the preservation policy be reviewed? Is it based on a schedule or an event that triggers the review? Record what changes are made, who made them, and when. This will help ensure your preservation policy is sustainable over time. A descriptive statement. What materials will be preserved? What won't be preserved? What formats are supported? How long will each category of records be preserved? How will access be provided? Who has access to these records? Where are the files stored? What hardware and software are being utilized? You want to also include an implementation plan. This is a set of plans that explain the overall details of a preservation plan, which include staff responsibilities, record requirements, access and restriction use, and best practices and standards that you're using. You want to also include a glossary. You want, probably at the end of your policy, include those terms for those who may not be familiar with digital preservation terminology. So here are some policy examples. We've included all of these on a resource list at the end of this presentation, and you will be able to view them after the webinar. So the first one is the analysis of digital preservation policies. It's part of a blog on the Library of Congress website. It is a guest post by a Library of Congress Junior Fellow in which she describes a project in which she identified and analyzed cultural heritage institution digital preservation policies. In this post, she lists a total of 33 digital preservation policies and strategies from around the world. Each institution is listed along with a link to its preservation policy. She includes a variety of institutions, including libraries, museums, and archives. The two other sample digital preservation policies I'd like to point you toward are those of Cornell University Library and Dartmouth College Library. These are great to look at, especially if you're from an academic library. So Cornell's policy is about 8 pages. It includes a purpose statement, their objectives, a scope, which includes their priorities, operating principles, which includes the standards that they comply with, roles and responsibilities, selection principles and guidelines for content, preservation activities, use and access, challenges that they're facing, cooperation and collaboration, and they also include 4 appendices which include terms, so like the glossary that I was speaking of earlier, and the resources that they use. Dartmouth policy is also 8 pages, but it's set up a little differently. They include an executive summary, an introduction, which includes their library mission and challenges of digital preservation, a mandate, principles, scope, their content types, digital preservation strategies, life cycle management, which is the management framework describing the stages that the digital resources go through throughout their existence, a stakeholders portion, and a policy review. So both of these policies hit most of the previously mentioned suggestions, as well as others that we didn't mention. This is how you want to handle your preservation policy. Hit the basics and then customize it to your institution. We are also providing you with 3 sources for policy templates. Once again, they'll be on the resource list with a link, so you can just link right to the template. So these 3 come from, the first one is from the NEDCC, which is the Northeast Document Conservation Center. And then we also have templates from Lyrasis and from the GISC Digital Media. The technology leg addresses the specific digital preservation strategies, staff, tools, equipment, and other means for achieving digital preservation objectives. This leg combines hardware, software, formats, storage media, networks, security measures, workflows, procedures, protocols, documentation, and skills, both technical and archival. Here's some criteria to consider when investing in technology. You want to prioritize. Determine what you wish to accomplish most. Assess. Define your criteria so you select appropriate technologies. Sequence. This sets your path for success. Funding. Look back at your skills and budget to figure out what technology works for you at your institution. Anticipate. Remember, this is not a one-time process plan. You want to keep up with technology, so determine your comfort zone. Technology is useless if you cannot use it or it cannot be supported. And evaluate. Review your choice before and after your investment to make sure you're achieving your goals. This process should be systematic and intentional. Documenting the process and outcomes may make it easier next time. Also, a couple other things to keep in mind. Outsourcing to service providers is increasingly an option. Decisions should be as thoughtful as the process to buy and implement technology. And technology changes, and organizations can plan to keep up with it, reflecting their resources and their requirements. When choosing what software to use, keep in mind these characteristics of sound software. It should be well documented, usable on a wide variety of platforms. It should have a support and user community available to you. It should be modular in design, supports batch processing and workflows, and licenses should support secondary use, or you should have the option to purchase additional licenses. If the software does not have these characteristics, you should consider that a red flag, that there is a weakness in the software that may negatively impact your institution. While the goal is to have a preservation solution that can preserve and protect your content and keep it accessible well into the future, most people will not start here. There are steps that you can take to get you closer. To do this, you have to evaluate your technological environment. Understand what you have, what you can do, and once you have a grasp on that, you can start to evaluate what else is out there and what technology solutions might work for you. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Kate, and she will address resources and best practices and standards.
So thanks very much, Julia. Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the last leg of the stool, and you will see things here that Julia has already talked about, and also you might see things from earlier webinars. So the resources part of the stool I feel is really broad, and it can encompass many things. But I think that by drawing from these different areas, it really shows the importance of a balanced approach to digital preservation management. So I'm going to talk a little bit about internal resources and then external resources. So starting off with your internal resources, right away you're going to see some of the things that Julia already talked about. One of the very first internal resources to consider is staffing. So Julia talked earlier about building your team. So you might look at what staff you have available. What are their skill sets? Are you missing anybody with a key set of skills for planning for digital preservation? The second internal resource that you can talk about is technology. So what sort of resources do you have available technology-wise? And this can include not only things like your digital content management or the software that you use to view your digital content, but also things like servers for storing your content. And the next piece of your resources is new. And I think that the next two actually encompass knowledge. So the first part is succession planning. And this is something that I think people don't necessarily like to think about, but it's really important to think about. So if you're not familiar with succession planning, this is planning on what is going to happen to your digital content should your organization, department, company no longer be able to support your digital content. So it's thinking about where does your data go? And I think usually when you think of succession planning, you think big, but you can also think small. So think of an example where maybe you have a music library on your campus, and they have been digitizing, say, a lot of sheet music or audio files from your college. And the college decides to close your music library. So what is going to happen to all of that content that your music library has digitized? Is it going to go to your special collections and archive center for your university? And if it's a lot of content, say it's like 10 terabytes of content, does your special collections and archives department have the ability to support that? So this is really why thinking about what is going to happen to your content should you no longer be able to support it is important. And it's not just if your department or center closes, but it can also be important for thinking about what's going to happen in the event of a disaster. So, and then the second part of internal resources that kind of encompasses knowledge is institutional knowledge. And this is something that can really be kind of good or bad depending on how you look at it. And this also ties back into staffing. So what institutional knowledge encompasses is who knows what. Is this knowledge written down? And if so, where is this knowledge located? So if you have a good handle on institutional knowledge, this can be really good for your digital preservation planning, because then you already have a good handle on what resources you have, what content you have. If not, this can kind of hinder your digital preservation planning, but also I feel that taking stock of what sort of institutional knowledge you have can be an opportunity to build up your institutional knowledge. So this is a very important resource when you're planning for digital preservation. And then the last section on this slide is what I think everybody thinks about when they think about internal resources, and of course that's funding. So how are you funding your digital preservation? Is it through a grant? Is it part of your budget? And to go into that a little bit more, so digital preservation may not be an explicit budget line item on your annual budget, but you still need to be able to make a compelling case for digital preservation. So one way to really make digital preservation a good part of your budget is to put it into your everyday workflow. And really, if you think about previous webinars, this actually can be really easy to do. So it can be things like, are you keeping inventories? Do you know what your most important items are? Where are you storing it? Are you backing up as you're creating content? Do you have an up-to-date disaster plan? All these things are part of digital preservation programming that are really easy to build into your everyday workflow, and they don't necessarily have to be a huge budget line item. And once again, thinking about funding, this is why succession planning is important. Thinking back to our example of the music library, it's a lot easier to think about having the increased capacity for a huge server now and slowly build up to it rather than the point when it closes and then you're scrambling to find funding. So this is why succession planning can be important for considering funding for digital preservation. So next we're going to look at some external resources. So you've kind of taken stock of what you have within your own institution. And now I think it's really good to look at what other people have done or what sort of standards and best practices are out there. And really, for something that's really only been a focus for not very long, as you can see, my first example up there is less than 20 years old. There are a lot of resources available. We've brought out some key ones on this slide, and there are actually a lot more on our resource slides at the end that Julia mentioned earlier. So I'm going to just go over briefly the ones on this slide. These are kind of recommended ones that we think you should look at, but I think there are a lot of good things out there for you guys to look at. So the very first one is the Preserving Digital Information Report from 1996. And this is one of the very first reports on digital preservation. And it's very good at laying the foundation for thinking about what digital preservation is. The second is the Trusted Digital Repositories Report from 2002. And this is kind of a checklist for the qualities of digital repositories. The third one, the Trusted Repositories Audit and Certification from 2011, is actually sort of a successor to the Trusted Digital Repositories Report. So they tie very closely together. And this is actually also an ISO standard. And there are actually a couple institutions that have really actually gone through this audit and certification process. Not very many, but there are a few. And this is sort of an expanded checklist for the qualities of digital repositories. The next one is actually one very important piece. It is the Open Archival Information System Reference Model, also known as OAIS, and this is also an ISO standards. So what this is really important for is this is a framework for thinking about digital preservation, and it also helps to provide a common language for digital preservation. So if you've been thinking about or researching digital preservation already, you've maybe already heard some of these terms. Ingest, archival information package, APE, I've also heard it said AIP, those sort of things. So that when you're talking to somebody else about digital preservation and they mention, APEs, you'll know what they're talking about. The next one is preservation metadata implementation strategies, and this provides metadata for tracking digital preservation events, such as ingesting linked into your institution, and it also is metadata for rights. The next one on the list of 10 principles is actually an international effort. You see the Center for Research Libraries, which is located here, but the Digital Curation Center is in England. Digital Preservation Europe is obviously located in Europe, and Nestor is located in Germany. So this is 10 very brief principles on basic characteristics of digital preservation repositories. So this is good to look at because it's a very brief list and can help you start thinking about digital preservation. And the last one is from the National Digital Stewardship Alliance, and it's the levels of digital preservation. So this is actually a rubric for assessing your content. And there's 4 top levels: protect your data, know your data, monitor your data, and repair your data. And then 5 categories that go along with those levels: file formats, storage and geolocation, information security, file fixity and data integrity, and metadata. And this is really beneficial for assessing where your content is. When I was at UIC, we had done an inventory of our digital content, and then we used these levels of digital preservation to kind of assess the levels where our content is. So this can be really good for thinking about where the level of where your content is. So you've taken stock of your internal resources, and you've looked at external resources, those standards and best practices that other institutions are using. And now you can start thinking about planning. So I think the important thing to think about here is preservation planning is really an ongoing process. Things are constantly changing. I showed you that list. You can see that new standards and best practices are constantly coming out. Things might change in your own institution. So you might have a new person start with a new set of skills. The system that you're using for presenting your digital content might no longer be supported. So this is important. This is why I think it's important to constantly think about preservation planning as an ongoing process. So while you're doing your planning, there's kind of two ways to think about it as an ongoing process. The first is self-assessment. So this is an internal review of your project or your content, and you can use the resources that on the previous slide to do this. Or you can do an external review and have somebody come and look at your content or your policy or your plan to see what you're doing for preservation planning. So while you're planning, it can be useful to think about outcomes. So what are your goals? What do you want standards conformance and good practice to look like for your organization? And I think it's important to note here that there is really no one-size-fits-all. Our institutions are different sizes, we've got different staff with different skills, we've got different content. So what's right for you might not be right for your neighboring institution. And one good way to think about this is gap analysis. So where do you want to aspire to? And you could use one of those lists on the previous slide to say, like, we want to do this part of the track checklist. This is where we're aspiring to. And it's really okay to start small and reach towards that goal. So that can be useful. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to introduce the next section.
Thank you, Julie and Kate. Just want to remind everyone that we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So save your questions and put them in the chat at the end of the presentation. And now we'll turn to part 2 of our presentation today on Provide. And I will hand the presentation over to David and Patrice.
Good morning. This is Patrice Prudhomme. This is the 6th, I hope everyone could hear me. This is the 6th and last module of the series with providing long-term access to digital content. I would like to start with the definition from the American Library Association in terms of the digital preservation. It combines policies, strategies, and actions to ensure access to content that is born digital or converted to digital form, regardless of the challenges of file corruption, media failure, and technological change. The goal of the digital preservation is the most accurate rendering possible of authenticated content over time. So with this definition in mind, what do we mean by long-term access? And with consideration to purpose and focus for either situation, long-term access preservation and short-term access. The preservation systems use proven, reliable technologies to make sure digital content remains readable and understandable into the future, while the access is more user-oriented. Access delivery systems use cutting-edge technology to make content available in the most expedient ways, using the latest technology available at any point in time. Okay, we're looking actually at 2 different perspectives here, and if one would envision to tune those perspectives into a single system to do preservation and access, it might be difficult. Perhaps one could develop preservation and access systems to work side by side over time, with preservation to care for objects and access systems to deliver them effectively. There are good reasons for accessing digital content over time. Well, one is to provide access that could be directed by specific demand, or the user demand, for one thing. But also there are the legal mandates, and two of them that came out in 2013, the Open Access to Research Articles Act, the Senate Bill 1900, that showed that each public institution of higher education shall develop an open access to research articles policy. And there's the FASTER, the fair access to science and technology research, expectation that new ideas and discoveries resulting from, this quote, research will advance science, stimulate innovation, grow the economy, and improve the lives of welfare of Americans, end of quote. There's also, we could look at it, I guess, from the institutional repository, institutional visibility as well. How can content be delivered over time? Well, content can be delivered the easy way by using by using current and known technologies, but this will change over time and depend on staff, users, and the nature of the institution. In delivering content, documentation is important, which can provide context as content is coherently, accurately represented by means of well-managed technologies, in agreement with policies and procedures where content is made accessible in an equitable fashion. Let's look at the organizational responsibilities. Now, policies, if used appropriately, are often the most effective and long-term method for defining organizational responsibilities. You may be able to develop and maintain current access policies. These policies must be transparent, easy to understand, follow, and accessible to anyone who might need them. The policies must address and manage any legal issues that may be associated with your collection, including compliance. To this, we could ask, do you have any legal mandates that make these policies accessible? Do any of your records include personal information that can't be shared? How will you ensure that all processes comply with access policy? However, and to get more into the mindset of long-term access, policies will need to reflect technological changes over time with respect to legal matters, discovery and delivery systems, and the management of digital preservation and access in parallel can augment greater sustainability of long-term access of resources and help remove barriers in the dissemination process. Term access. Well, in terms of defining services, I hope this is a better, I hope. In terms of defining services and accessing decision, the access decision rather, who decides what will be accessible? Do you have policies, deeds of gift, other legal documents that address these issues? And how are these decisions recorded? So when you reevaluate your policy in the future, you do not need to start over. In terms of assisting users, monitoring and managing the roles, who is responsible for determining best access mechanisms, process, method for the materials at hand? Is there more than one method? Who is in charge of making sure the system is working for users? How is it working or not working for your users? What happens if the system itself fails? What are the backup plans? And last but not least, in terms of user support, what types of support are available to users, such as user guides and access policies available, and how to share these with the users. Now, let's go to policies, and once these different roles and responsibilities are understood, we look at access policies from first the issues and then the implementation. In terms of issues, I guess it's mostly about who and how. Who is allowed to access the collections, determined by agreement and policies. Are there different policies per content type? If differences exist due to different agreements and policies, how does your organization manage these differences? How will access be provided in a different way, via a different system? How do users gain access? Is the system accessible to all? Password protected? Reserved to select group, for example, or a pay for services? What options do users have? And then here we can think about the W3C, Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. In terms of implementation, we have documentation and report access decision in policy statement. Once questions about needs are addressed, let's remember that to document the decision and translate them into policy statements to assure that the system helps monitor and identify issues relative to current access policies and procedures on an ongoing basis to help document for future decision. Now, in terms of the management of the life cycle legal issues include copyright, but copyright is only a portion of legal issues in digital preservation. However, how do we manage items with potential legal problems? And to this, a recommendation could be to manage potential problems from the time digital content is acquired, regardless of the size of the organization. It is important to have a good understanding of the content, as it was mentioned in Module 5, that every group, say in a library, collects specific types of information, photographs, publications, and so forth. Still, important to have a general understanding of content collected and identify the legal issues each time. And once one knows what there is, the importance of documentation relative to standard agreements that transfer ownership and copyright licenses is critical. And making note of legal restrictions in an inventory can be important too. All that in order to streamline the process. There are many more questions that pertain to copyright, legal restrictions, federal laws, donations, etc. But David will continue with copyright, perpetual access, delivery of content. Now to David.
Quite a bit of background on copyright related to access. The time that materials in an archive are being accessed is when copyright questions most come up and turn into significant issues. Copyright, I wanted to provide a bit of background on copyright rights. They are more complex than it's not a single right that is attributed to a work. The human creator of the work is considered the initial owner of copyright, and as I say, copyright is a group of rights, and they can be transferred singly or in bulk. Just to enumerate them a bit, the primary copyright right that we think about is that of reproduction, where materials can be actually copied and multiple copies are made of a single work. Another right that can be, again, transferred or held is to create adaptations or derivatives of the material that has been created. Copyright holders also have the right to, once copies are made, to distribute them to the public. there are that could be for cost or at no charge. The right to public performance of a copyrighted work is also a separate right, as is public display of works. And some of these are more pertinent to copyrighted visual works or performing works that can be copyrighted. Another situation that is developing beyond that is what are called new use cases. These are materials in one format that are now being not just adapted to other works, but transformed through technology into new types of material, such as when an existing print book is transformed into an enhanced ebook. So this is a new situation, and copyright law and cases will evolve over time to handle such new situations. These kind of things, these kind of issues about copyright will come up when, as I said, when materials are being accessed. People, users will look at items that they're retrieving in an archive, and they'll say, well, is this material copyrighted? I can't tell by looking at it. Is there some information about what should I do to arrange to make use of them? What steps do I have to undergo or undertake in order to appropriately use and compensate the copyright holder, if any? Now, let me talk about exceptions. Exceptions to the copyright law are what libraries and archives allow libraries and archives to actually function. Libraries and archives may make up to 3 copies of material for archival purposes. So they're not the copyright holders, but they can. The law will allow libraries to do such a thing as an explicit exception. Copies may also be made to replace a damaged, deteriorating, or lost item over time. Physical and digital format migration is also permissible to libraries and archives. Another important exception is fair use. This is a whole range of activities that can be done as exceptions to copyright. What is fair is a vague concept, and it's been talked about a lot, and it is difficult to pin down. Certainly the law does not explicitly describe what's fair and what's not fair. That is frustrating to researchers and practitioners, but that kind of flexibility is important that so that the law can be applied to all types of cases that come up. And so fair use addresses all of the rights that we talked about above, the reproduction, right to distribute copies, etc. Let me just give a little more background on what is fair use. Fair use applies to certain types of usage. Using materials in criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, including making multiple copies of materials, scholarship, and research. In order to decide whether the use you're making of one of these types of materials in your project is fair or not, you need to think about what is the purpose and character of the use. Is it a commercial? Are you intending to use it for commercial purposes or for nonprofit educational purposes? Commercial use is considered less fair, and educational use is more fair as a way to appropriate material. The nature of the copyrighted work itself. Is it factual material, or is it fanciful or imaginative in nature? Including factual material is actually considered to be more fair or potentially more fair. Published materials are, it's more fair to make use of those than it would be if a material is previously unpublished. What is the, how much of the material is being used? What's the amount and substantiality of the material? Is that the major portions of it or the significant portions being used? The more you use, the less likely it is to be considered fair. And what is the potential market value of the copyrighted work that's being incorporated? All of these factors can come into play, but not necessarily. Every situation is unique, so you would need to run through this list each time you're trying to make use of material that may be copyrighted. It's also worth investigating developments in Creative Commons licensing, which is an alternative to an alternative way for copyright holders or authors in general to either allow others to use material or restrict usage in a permissible fashion without going through copyright law. Also, this will pertain to open access publishing, where materials can be more freely distributed, shared, and copied than may be permitted under copyright law. Another special case that Patrice touched on about policy and access policy is access to journal content. At the present time, journal content is generally hosted by publishers, and the publisher of academic journals in particular are the providers of the access. Now, this can turn into a major problem when in two situations. For example, subscriptions can lapse. Then how would your institution retain access? Or even more major, what if the journal ceases publication? Now, it would be beyond the means of small and medium-sized institutions to try and create their own archival collection of their back issues of journals, for example. The solution is that larger institutions are forming hosted archives of periodicals. These can be consortial in nature or even national in some countries. A lot of this discussion is drawn from a plan for the Germany to examine whether they needed to develop a national archive and for their country. Now, journal archived materials can be digitized materials from print issues that are previously published, or they can be extend to current issues and into the future foreign digital materials. And archives are growing in number, and there are many different models of how they are structuring access to their content. I'll talk about a few of them. The British Library is developing a shared storage network between several different UK national libraries, Wales, Scotland, I believe, and these storage networks are collecting books, newspapers, and sound recordings. Now, access is strictly limited to these copyrighted materials so there are only 6 access nodes where people can actually come and make use of them. These are not open to the general public in a wide way over the internet, for example. At these access points, which are typically in the National Library buildings, rights management is applied, digital rights management, to the journal content, and the system that has been built at the British Library can actually charge users for content, for access to the content, as needed or specified by the publishers. In Holland, the Royal Library is developing a system they call the eDepot. They're attempting to collect all journals from the 20 largest publishers and 80% of all open access publications. Access to these materials is only on site for private research only. This would be called a dim archive. So material is not entirely hidden, but it can be viewed in a very limited fashion. These institutions are allowing for eventual wider access to these materials in case of some of what are called these trigger events that I discussed. If a subscription lapses, access may be increased. If a journal ceases publication, access may be increased. Another network in the United States is called CLOCKS, which stands for Controlled Locks. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. This is a dark archive where publishers will deposit their back issues for storage in a network of servers where the data is replicated. That's the lots of copies. Access to journals in CLOCKS is only allowed when content is no longer available by the publisher. So once a journal ceases, that is a trigger event allowing wider access to the material that has been stored in a secure fashion in CLOCKS. The HathiTrust is maintaining a database of rights for all of the items that they have in their collection. Depositors will make an agreement regarding the specific rights that are allowed to their users. Portico, another service, is also providing access only after trigger events. They can, after an institution cancels their subscription, Portico is able to provide access to back issues only to those previous subscribers. So they maintain specific rights information about who is a subscriber or was a subscriber, so that those institutions and their users would only be the ones who would be allowed to access that kind of material. Now, an important part of providing access to archival materials takes place when you're choosing or making your plans to design an access system. That would be a system that you would, however users would search for materials and retrieve them. Part of your design process is focused on your current users and your current needs, but it's important while you're doing this design to think about the future and what will your needs be over time. As you are designing your system, you will be spending time profiling your data and the types of access that are involved. Just a few important points about your users. You want to have a good sense of your current users, but also try to project who might your future users be if over time your user collection may change. Try and anticipate what the differences might be. And what are the possible uses that your data may undergo? What kind of changes may occur over time? is it going to be useful in the same way now and in the future? Maybe there's some types of material that turn from current importance, current policy development into items of historical interest. So that would be one way that over time people will be accessing your material differently and for different needs. Sensitivity is an important factor. Items maybe think about how sensitive your material is. What are the legal restrictions that are on an item now, such as medical records, for instance, or higher education records. These may be less important over time, potentially, so access may be opened up over time. This is something to consider as you design your system. What is the useful life of your information? Is there a way to project that into the future? And think also about, in particular for data, does it require interpretation to be used? What kind of frame of reference is available or needs to be available to users to make use of quantitative data in particular, and perhaps users have a certain level of expertise now that may not be available in the future. Perhaps tools will need to be built to compensate for that. Think about your past experience also in making information available over a long period of time. That can help you. Some examples from your previous activities may help you as you design your system. Think also about trade-offs. Once you have a sense of what your users are like and what some of the points of your information are, the characteristics of your information, these may compensate for each other. As I said, users can be hard to predict in the future. It's hard to know what people will be, what kind of people will be using your information. Metadata is a very important factor in compensating for the unknown. As users change and their methods change, metadata can be altered by the archive managers to compensate. Maybe metadata can be enhanced or revisited over time. Data that is difficult to interpret archives can create new interpretive materials, interpretive tools or services to help future users with their needs and how to understand the materials. Part of providing material is understanding and fitting material into users' workflows. Promotion of archives is significant. Studies show that there is a very low awareness by scholars in what archival products are available to them. This kind of outreach is part of is an important part of providing access from now on into the future. It's important to explain and demonstrate to your potential users that you need to reach out to how preservation systems can first increase exposure of their research work that they may deposit in your collection, and also how can preservation systems can make it easier for them to share their data, share their materials, results, and research outputs with colleagues. Archives can expend a lot of effort in supporting digital preservation systems over time. An awareness of the creator options for copyright rights and open access advocacy are points that librarians and archives managers need to continually work with with their user population. I don't think this is the kind of thing that will go away. Disciplines really vary quite drastically in the way that they want to share information or not share information. Even within a subdiscipline, the practitioners may have completely different attitudes towards privacy or their publicity for their materials. It's important to note that interactions between archive managers and scholars on a continual basis can bring down the barriers to bringing materials in and then getting them out again in a sophisticated and appropriate way for those populations. Just to conclude, access has many aspects. I've covered some of these points. I've got a lot more detail that I put into the readings that were listed on the slides, and they're also in the resource guides. I hope this list of highlights will spur you to look into some of them, and then feel free to get in touch with the CARLI digital preservation trainers and for dialogue about this and ways to think about digital preservation from the user's point of view. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sandra to wrap it up and go through the resource list.
Thank you, David and Patrice. The next couple slides are just some of the resources that the presenters mentioned in their presentations earlier today. We just wanted to make sure those were available for you to locate later on if you go back to the presentation once it's on the CARLI website and take a look at it. So we're just kind of going to basically go through those. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box now, and the presenters would be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the presentations and the information that you heard today. Did we cover it so well that you have absolutely no questions at all? That would be a wonderful thing. Also, at the end of this presentation, you'll also see contact information for any of the presenters. So if you find you have questions later, you certainly can contact them directly with any questions you may have about the presentations that they had today. So as you can see there, they are. Whee! There's all the